Good day, my name is Paul Bawoye, and today I'll be speaking about some series of events that transpired in the late 1970s that led to the global environmental catastrophe in Hudson Falls, New York. Now, when you take a look at this, you see beautiful water. It's blue, it's clear, it's aesthetically pleasing, and the forest is pretty green and wonderful. But what if I were to tell you that this also happens to be the most contaminated site in the United States? Here we have a spatial graph that actually shows in part the Hudson River flowing from the upper Hudson region all the way down to New York City before eventually dislodging into the ocean. The location of focus would be centered around Glen Falls, New York, and Hudson Falls, New York, seen over here. And the purpose, once again, will be to illustrate how a major company in the United States failed to properly discard of their waste, and also the subsequent effects that actually ensued afterwards. A Superfund. So the Hudson River is often referred to as a Superfund site. Now, what is a Superfund? The Superfund refers to the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act that was enacted in 1980 by Congress, commonly known as CERCLA. Essentially, this allowed for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to clean up contaminated sites while also forcing the parties and perpetrators responsible for such contamination to be held liable, to be held responsible, but also to perform any kind of cleanup or at least reimburse the government fund that was created in place for such cleanup purposes. Here we see that the Hudson River, like I mentioned, was also considered today as the largest Superfund site in the country, and we'll see just about why. So GE, General Electric, we know them to be one of the major production companies for household appliances in the country. They make refrigerators that can be found in everyday homes, or even also appliances such as stoves and fans. GE, in 1947, they commissioned two plant bases in upstate New York, in Fort Edward and Hudson Falls. They initially were made to create parts for World War II bombers, but after the war, they then transitioned the production site into a capacitator and transforming site. And in building such products for such as capacitors and transformers, GE was using PCB, also known as polychlorinated biphenyl, to create these products. They used it as some form of insulating or non-conducting fluid to make their products more effective until 1976, when PCB was finally outlawed and banned. And then GE was responsible for trying to figure out how to discard of the massive amounts of PCB they'd acquired over the years, and they chose to discard it and to dislodge them straight into the Hudson River. Of course, this came to the grin of many wildlife researchers and also medical personnel, physicians and nurses, which began to cite and notice some irregularities between bird and fish-like nature, but also with the amount of incidents, but also with the incident rates of hospitalizations between the residents and the constituents around this region. And of course, this came to the grin of wildlife researchers and medical personnel, such as doctors and nurses, which cited some irregularities between birds and fish, and also part of the aquatic life, but also with the incident rates of hospitalizations relating to heart disease, diabetes, and also respiratory illness. So PCB also bioaccumulates over time, which means that most concentrated levels of PCB be found in the body fats of animals, but also in those who consume these animals, which in this case are humans. And when we speak about PCB levels, to understand exactly just how much actually becomes detrimental to one's health, the Great Lakes has a protocol which was actually formed by a consortium of about eight different states located around the Great Lakes. Although the EPA generally provides advice on how the states should evaluate PCB risk and set also their guidelines, each individual state is currently responsible for their own advisory level. Here we see that according to these eight Great Lakes consortium, anything less than 0.05 parts per million is not really bound by any limitations, which means you can consume as much as you want. And when you go from 0.06 to about 0.2 parts per million, you should be limited to about one fish every week. And so on and so forth, up until where it says about 2 parts per million, where it actually advises one not to consume at all. Now, this becomes problematic because when you compare 3 different large coastal waters to 4 regions in the Hudson River, as we see here between Thompson Island Pool, Stillwater Reach, and Waterford Reach, and also below Federal Dam, which are 4 regions found inside the Hudson River, compared to 3 other coastal waters across the country, we see between these 3 coastal waters, the Great Lakes, Delaware Bay, and Chesapeake Bay, they range between 0 to 2 parts per million, which isn't necessarily deemed, according to the advisory board, as dangerous. But when you were to examine the other fish in the Hudson River, in these 4 parts, you find they actually range from about 12 parts per million up until even over 40 parts per million, which are also detrimental to the health of not the fish, but also to those who consume the fish, in this case, human beings. As mentioned earlier, there has been some concerns in regards to health effects as a result of exposure. Researchers have found an association between PCB exposure and cancerous cells. They've also found to be some reproductive and hormonal disruptions in relations to low birth weight as a result of exposure to PCB, and also some cerebrovascular irregularities. Now, since then, has there been any updates? Well, after many arguments back and forth between the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and GE has finally agreed to clean up and own any responsibility in relations to the contamination, which has caused about $1.7 billion that has gone into this PCB cleanup. In 2002, the EPA mandated GE to dredge about 500 acres of contaminated soil and water and essentially remove about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds of PCBs that were found in these regions, which was later acknowledged to be actually 3 times more than initially reported. As a result of the dredging, we have seen some successful decline in rates in PCB levels when researched. We found in Fort Edward, one of the places where the plants was originally erected, we've seen a decline from 45 parts per million up until 12, and also from Charlottesville from 47.19. So we've seen a drastic decline as a result of dredging, which has proven to be successful in actually reducing the PCB levels found in these regions. As of 2019, extensive cleanup has been done and continues to be done to reach EPA's mandate to create safe water for the fish life, but also to create healthy fish for humans to consume in the future. Thank you.